So here it is. Just moving the mic. So yeah, so here we have A&H GS3. Even when it was new, it was considered prosumer. It was never really considered to be something that would be used in a professional studio. For instance, its internal workings are all unbalanced, and it outputs at -10 dBV instead of +4 dBu. So as long as you're aware of that, when you're connecting it to equipment that's expecting +4 dBu, there are ways around that as well. There are companies who provide pieces of equipment which convert from balanced to unbalanced and vice versa. So it's not a complete loss. But just to let you know, this is not an SSL, it is not a Neve, it is not an API, it's not a Trident. It's not meant to take the world on. It is really, was even at its launch, really meant for home stroke project studios, and therefore it's fitting that I would have one in my home studio. So starting from the top of the mixer, you've got the direct outputs, which are half normaled to my audio interface inputs. You have the tape returns, which in the old days would come back from a tape machine. Because we're in the modern times, this is being replaced by a computer. So the audio interface outputs come back to the tape returns. The next row of connectors are the mic pre-inputs. They're all on XLRs. The next row of connectors are the line inputs. So anything that isn't mic level will be connected to the line inputs. And then the next row of connectors are the channel inserts. Inserts are a cross between an input and an output, and they're used, as the name suggests, to insert other equipment, whether it's a compressor, an EQ, or whatever it may be, into the signal chain for that particular channel. Next, we have buttons and knobs, and down at the bottom, faders. So I'll go through all of those as well. The first button, the little red button at the top, is the phantom power button. The one that's poking, that's holding up Public Enemy there. So those little red buttons there, those are the phantom power buttons, and they engage or disengage 48 volts of phantom power to each channel, depending on whether or not you're using condenser mics. If you're using condenser mics, then you need phantom power, and therefore that's what it's for. There's a little grey button which you might not be able to see from this angle. Hopefully you can see slightly at an angle, I'm not sure. But anyway, there's a little grey button beneath the thick white painted line beneath the 48 volt buttons, and that says mic line. When the button is up, the input to the channel is the mic input. When the button is down, the input to the channel is the line input. Beneath that, these red topped knobs, or potentiometers to use the proper term, they are the input gain controls. And what that means is the signal that is being fed to that channel, the amount of signal that's coming into the channel is controlled by the gain. So if the signal level is low, you can turn the gain up. If the signal level is high, you can turn the gain down. The next button is a selector, which when it's in the engaged position down, it allows the line signal to be controlled by the fader. When it's up, it allows the input from the tape return to be controlled by the fader. Then we've got these green topped potentiometers, and they control the level of signal that's being sent to the monitor Q output. So that would be for headphone mixes or front of stage mixes if you're doing a live band, for example. And then you've got 2 band EQ, low frequency, high frequency shelving EQ, which can be applied to the signal in the monitor section. So below that, you've got these red dual concentric knobs. The inner part of the knob is the gain control for that particular channel's monitor section. And so in other words, how much of the signal is being fed into the monitor. And the outer ring is the pan control. In this instance, this one is pushed all the way to the right. In this instance, this one is pushed all the way to the left. So these would be used as a stereo pair. Beneath that, you've got the PFL button. PFL in this instance stands for pre-fader listen. The thing about pre-fader listen is that post-fader listen also begins with a P, but in this instance, it's not post-fader listen, it's pre-fader listen. So if the fader is down to 0, or down to minus infinity, I should say, then you can still listen to what's coming out of the fader by pressing the PFL button. Now, when I say fader, in this instance, because this is a prosumer desk, it actually has a pot for a fader. On a larger, more professional desk, you'd have 2 sets of faders. Maybe the second set of faders might only be 60mm throw instead of 100mm throw, but you would have 2 sets of faders, one for the monitoring and one for the main input. I probably should have explained at the beginning, this is what's known as an inline recording console, because each channel has a monitor section and a input section all in line. So on a bigger desk, these second red knobs would actually be faders, either mini faders or on the biggest desk, again, full size faders. So this PFL controls what's being heard in the monitor section, and it solos, which is basically what it is. A PFL is, in this instance, is, you can think of it as a solo button. It solos what's coming into that channel regardless of the level of the fader, or in this case, potentiometer. So below that, you've got a mute button. As you can see at this stage, apart from these 2 channels over here, all of the monitor section I've got muted. It's just for what I'm doing at the moment. But it's simple enough to engage and disengage just by pressing the big red button there. And as you can see, there are lots of these big red buttons around the console for doing exactly that purpose. Muting whatever is coming out of that channel. But even with mute engaged, if you press PFL, then whatever is in that channel will be heard. So the next thing down is the selector. Actually, there's 2 selectors which choose whether the main channel or the monitor gets fed from the auxiliaries. These auxiliaries go to the effects section of the desk. So if you turn that up, it increases the signal coming through the channel being sent to FX1, FX2, FX3, FX4. Okay, simple enough. But these 2 buttons here allow you to decide whether you want the monitor signal to go to the effects bus or the channel input to go to the effects bus. So that's what they're for. And that's what these do. So I've kind of explained both things in one there. These are actually your auxiliary sends. The next green button, similar to the green button up there, that green potentiometer controls the amount of signal that's being sent to the monitor Q section. These green topped potentiometers control how much signal is being sent to the channel Q section. Here, this is the master Q control, and this will then go to the stereo Q and mono Q outputs on the desk, and this controls the level of signal that is sent to those Qs. And then those Qs, like I said, would either be used for front of stage or for headphones, depending on the application, whether you're using it as a live mixer or using it in a studio situation, recording situation, whatever. So that's how you control how much of each signal is sent to those outputs, and then those outputs would then go off to the artist for their headphone mixes. Okay. The next three potentiometers that we have here, the blue colored ones, like here, they're EQ controls. Blue stands for EQ in this setup. So we've got high shelf, and then we've got semi-parametric, mid, and lows. Parametric EQs are EQs that allow you to control the parameters, hence the name parametric, which control the gain, the frequency, and the width of the control. So something that's got a wide control will affect a wide range of frequencies, whereas something that's got a narrow control will affect a narrow range of frequencies. And so these small buttons control the gain, i.e. the amount of whatever frequency it is that is being sent, and they can be turned up or down. But these outer, on these last two, these outer controls control the actual frequency. So the mids and the lows, you can control whether you're boosting or cutting 40 hertz to 120 hertz, for example, in the lows, something like that. And then maybe 200 hertz to 6,000 hertz in the mids, or whatever it is. I don't know the actual figures. I'd have to look them up. But it gives you the opportunity to choose which parts of the frequency range you want to affect with boost or cut, as the case may be. So all of this section is meant for whatever is being fed to the fader. And all of this section is meant to be for whatever is being fed to, on a larger console, what would be the small faders, and on this console, these little red potentiometers, which act as a fader anyway, because all a fader does is either increase or decrease the signal that's going through the channel. So that's what they're doing. So EQ can be engaged or disengaged with the little white buttons below the blue buttons. Up here, that isn't the case. The EQ is always engaged. If you don't want it to affect the signal, you just leave it at 12 o'clock. So it's neither boosting nor cutting. But down here, you can completely bypass the EQ by disengaging it altogether. These brown covered potentiometers are the pan pots So in the center, it's mono. It can be panned to the left or panned to the right. And obviously, if you're using two channels as a stereo pair, then it makes sense to pan one hard left and the other hard right. Although, when it comes to the mix, you might want to, for example, have it going less to the right so that the instrument is placed more to the left in the stereo field, or vice versa. But generally speaking, especially in the case of some in a digital mix, you would just leave these hard panned left and right and let whatever's going on within the mix control the panning. Beneath those, we've got more PFL buttons, and these are, so again, as I mentioned, PFL lets you know what's going on in the monitor section up here, regardless of where the fader is, where it's the same down here, regardless of where the fader or potentiometer or whatever is, the PFL solos those channels. So even if you've got it on mute, you can still hear what's going on in that channel if you use PFL. So that's that. Then beneath the PFL, again, you've got, like I said before, any of these big red buttons, they're all mutes. So those will mute the channels. These next set of buttons, they select where the output from the fader is going. So this first little grey button above the white button, if it's up, anything coming from this channel goes to the group outputs, and these are my groups here. 8 mono groups or 4 stereo groups, depending on how you want to look at them. So if a button is up, then these 4 buttons down here, which are groups 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. If this button is up and then you press one of these down, the signal from this channel will then go to whichever group it's been assigned to. If this button is down, then the output from the fader will go to the direct output. And then the direct output will obviously then feed whatever it's connected to. So you can choose to send the output from the channel to the direct output or to a group output. Independent of whether or not it goes to the group output or the direct output, these little white buttons will send it to LR, which is the main fader, or main 2 faders. I've actually used some tape to connect them together because, you know, stereo. So yeah, so those control the final output from the mixing console. So whether or not these channels go to that output depend on whether or not this little white button, probably do it over here where you can see it better, is engaged. If it's down, then whatever's coming out of that channel will also come out of the main faders. If it's up, then it will still go to wherever it's been routed, whether it's the group output or the direct output, but you won't hear it through the control room. So that's how it all works. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them for you. If not, then hopefully you've learned something. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time or not. And either way, I hope you do something that makes you happy.